Welcome to Clay News and Views, the podcast. My name is Josh Allen. I think if you're watching this, you probably already know that. If not, hello. Yes, that's my real name, and yes, I had it before either of the football players. Today, we are going to talk about some recent stories that were on the website, clayviews.com, run by Substack. We run all of our content through there. For those of you that don't know, Clay News and Views is a collaborative effort. It's the only free and independent news source in Clay County by people who live in Clay County. There's me, there's Josh Allen, that's me, Pete, and Susie. So there's three of us, three main contributors to the podcast and to the website, creating content, trying to cover as many stories as we can that are important to Clay County that sometimes are neglected or don't get coverage elsewhere for a variety of reasons. Today, we're going to talk about a couple of different things. We are going to talk about, first and foremost, the case against Tammy Jo Saucier. There have been three stories that have been written by me personally about the case against this woman who used to be the assistant principal or the principal's secretary, which is AKA the bookkeeper position in elementary school here in Clay County. We're also going to talk about a history story that was written by our very own Pete Swanson, and then the Clay Delegation meeting, and then an update on a challenge to red light cameras that is being mounted by one particular Clay County resident. So, we took a little bit of a break, but we're back now. So these are some recent stories. We will be in more of a cadence in terms of podcast episodes for Clay News and Views. You should see something once a week, every other week, covering stories and content that we have created and written, and also stories and content from elsewhere and interviews with people from around the county, right? So 2025 is going to be a big year for Clay News and Views, and we appreciate you listening. We appreciate you reading. So let's get into our first set of stories here about Tammy Jo Saucier. Tammy Jo Saucier last year, if you aren't aware, up until the beginning of last year, was the bookkeeper at Doctors Inlet Elementary School in Clay County on County Road 220. Well, it was discovered in 2024 that she at the school, over on 220, was stealing money from the school. I try to give as many details in these stories as people need to understand what's happening without drowning people in details, but I can go into a little bit more detail here as we talk about the story. So the first story that we wrote was back in August. This was also in the midst of two particular Clay County School Board members, Aaron Skipper and Michelle Hansen, pushing for more robust internal auditing of all of the spending, all the procedures, all the processes within the Clay County School District. So this became sort of a central debate between them, Superintendent Brodsky, and Dr. Susan Legutko, who was essentially the CFO. She has an official title of Assistant Superintendent of Business Affairs or something like that. But she is essentially the CFO of the school district. Dr. Legutko, in the midst of the story about Tammy Jo Saucier at a board meeting, claimed that there was no need for an audit because no funds were being misspent, no funds were being misappropriated, that there was zero chance that anyone was not using money the way that they should be using the money. And what we know from the Tammy Jo Saucier case is that's simply not true. Tammy Jo Saucier has been accused of stealing nearly $100,000. $84,000 is in some change is the official total. What she was doing was stealing money from bank accounts, stealing cash donations that were coming into the school. Let me just say allegedly, right? That's what she's accused of. And she's been accused of using school credit cards to go to places like Home Depot and buy a bunch of stuff for herself. Eventually, she was caught. The way that it works in general in the Clay County School District is the bookkeepers at each individual location are responsible for a whole bunch of accounting related things within the school. There are a bunch of different accounts that monies go into and out of. So if a particular club is collecting money, they have their own accounts. They have money going in, they have money going out. And at the end of any month, it's just like your own personal checking or savings account. You should be able to account for, well, I know why this money went out. I know what it was spent on. I have the receipts to show it. And each bookkeeper at these locations, they're responsible for making sure that everything adds up and that all the dollars and cents are accounted for. Well, we have email trails showing that people at the district office were talking to Tammy Jo Saucier on a regular basis about why her reports were late. They weren't getting filled out correctly. There were receipts missing. The amounts didn't make sense. Money that should be in an account was not in an account. So the paperwork didn't match the actual balances in the accounts. And eventually, you do that for long enough and people are going to get wind that something's not right. We don't know all the nuts and bolts of how the investigation started or how the sheriff's office handled it or whomever handled it. Because a lot of this, they're still saying it's an ongoing investigation. They haven't released all the full details. It hasn't officially gone to trial yet. So, we don't have the full evidence that's been presented because it hasn't been presented to the judge yet. So in the midst of all these things, we've got Dr. Legutko saying that it's impossible for money to be misspent. There's no need for auditing. But we know that Tammy Jo Saucier is accused of this. And not only is she accused of this when she got busted and they were going to arrest her, she led cops on a wild chase through the county, ended up in a graveyard somewhere, and ends up popping off shots at the cops. They, of course, return fire because only morons shoot at the police. And she ends up losing a pinky finger and losing her spleen. And she had all sorts of different injuries from her encounter with the Clay County Sheriff's Office. And then she gets arrested. She goes to jail. And time goes on, and a lot of these trials, these defendants, they waive their right to a speedy trial. I'm not sure if that was actually done here, but usually the wheels of justice don't move super fast in a lot of these complicated, heavy stakes sort of cases. So what you have, the next sort of update that we have that was sort of pertinent to this, you can go to the Clay County Clerk of the Court website, it's clayclerk.com, and you can look at all the documents that are on the docket for any particular case. There wasn't really anything outstanding until towards the end of November, beginning of December. Tammy Jo Saucier has apparently, by her own words in a letter she tried to write to the judge, been talking to prosecutors about getting a more lenient sentence. So she felt like she wasn't getting a fair deal from the prosecutors. So she wrote a letter to the judge, or 2 letters to the judge, in fact, trying to get him to read it. But these letters were considered ex parte communication, meaning one party in a case is submitting communication to the court and the other parties in the case. So the defendant was submitting this to the judge, but the plaintiff, which is the state, had no idea that this communication was going on. These letters are sent into the court. The court adds them to the docket, but they stamp them very clearly as ex parte communication that has not been reviewed by the judge. But these letters are interesting because it tells you Tammy Jo Saucier's state of mind. And I'm not going to read the entire letters to you. You can go to the website. You don't have to pay to read any of this stuff. It's all here on the website for free. But essentially, Tammy Jo Saucier believes that she has served enough time in jail and that she should just be let out and be put on parole because the reason she did all these terrible things is she was addicted to painkillers. So is that true? Is it not? I don't know. I can tell you this made a pretty big splash in the education community that is aware of Tammy Jo Saucier, that worked with her or worked with people that worked with her, and they were pretty upset. Some of the very sort of nonchalant ways in which Tammy Jo described the things that happened to her, but didn't really acknowledge the impact that a lot of her actions have had on the kids at the school, the teachers at the school, the parents at the school. Because to be very clear, the money that Tammy Jo Saucier is stealing, she stole it from kids. They had paid money into various clubs. She stole it from parents who had also paid money into these clubs. She was borrowing money, as we'll talk about in my most recent letter, from teachers at the school and not paying it back. There are unconfirmed allegations. None of these are in the court record, but there are unconfirmed allegations that Tammy Jo Saucier was hopping around to different classrooms in the school, stealing money out of classrooms. So again, those are unconfirmed, but these are the sort of rumors and swirl that you get when someone is doing this. There's a lot of folks who believe that the $84,000 total that Tammy Jo Saucier is accused of stealing is probably on the low end of what she may have stolen. Again, there's no evidence of that. The state has not brought anything other than the $84,000 worth of charges. But people are upset. They were very upset in the way that Tammy Jo Saucier essentially played the victim. I shot the police and that was bad, but then they shot me and I lost my pinky finger and I lost my spleen. Haven't I suffered enough, dear judge? Please consider not giving me any further consequences for my actions. She did write that she felt pressure to make an offer to the prosecutors. They did take her attempted murder of a law enforcement officer charges, and they dropped those down to assault on a law enforcement officer. This is probably a topic for another day, but prosecutors tend to overcharge in some of these cases. They will charge more than what they can probably prove in a court proceeding, trying to get a defendant to come to a plea deal with lesser charges. Maybe that happened here, maybe it didn't, I don't know. Sometimes prosecutors are also sort of kind, depending on the situation, and they try to get consequences that fit the crime, but aren't necessarily the harshest consequences. I don't know what exactly happened there, but Tammy Jo Saucier did not like the deal and the pressure she felt was being exerted on her by the prosecutor's office. So she writes this appeal to the judge. As of this point, there's nothing in the court record that shows that the judge has reviewed any of this communication. So I don't know if the judge is aware that she wrote letters and doesn't know what's in them, or doesn't know at all that she wrote letters. I don't know. But Tammy Jo feels like she, should be let off. And what a lot of people feel is fairly easy. And that brings us to our most recent story that I wrote last week. Some of the teachers and one teacher and one parent also submitted letters to the judge that were also marked as ex parte communication and not reviewed by the judge. And these letters, tell a very different tale of the, impact of Tammy Jo Saucier's crime. There's a teacher who submitted a trip, and it tells, that she borrowed money. Tammy Jo Saucier borrowed money from someone, and one of the people that she borrowed it from, she borrowed nearly $1,000, right? And that sucks, right? To be loaning money to someone and they don't pay you back, and I hate that for anybody, but that's not the worst that's outlined in this letter from the teacher, and you can go and read the full details here. But the story, as it stands here, is there was a field trip for the safety patrols at the school that had been set up and arranged. And the way that these field trips work, if you're not in the education world, you don't understand. The teachers arrange and set up the details of the field trip, and then they tell the bookkeeper how much the field trip costs. The bookkeeper goes and takes money out of the account that is appropriate to pay for the field trip and pays for the field trip. So in this case, the kids were going to, I believe it's Busch Gardens. Yep, Busch Gardens. So the teachers, as far as they were aware, trip was paid for, right? They've got the buses, they're going down there. So apparently she paid for the buses, either from the county or charter buses, I don't know. She did manage to pay for the buses. Probably knew she would get caught pretty quick if the buses didn't show up, maybe. Just a guess, I don't know. Kids get down to Busch Gardens. Busch Gardens says, well, you didn't pay us for the tickets, right? And we're talking a bunch of kids, I don't know how many, at least 20, 30 kids probably, right? Tickets for a full day of stuff going on at Busch Gardens. Tickets aren't paid for. Tammy Jo, the bookkeeper slash, principal's secretary, had not paid for the tickets. Luckily, there was a parent on the trip who could afford to pay for 20 or 30 tickets to Busch Gardens off the cuff. So, the crazy thing about these stories is also the school district itself has been completely silent on this. And I don't mean that they need to come and issue some grandiose statement to everybody on what's happening or the investigation or whatever. But I tell you who they have not communicated with. They have not communicated with the parents of Dr. Zinla Elementary. There's been no communication from the school district, from the parents. There has been no attempt by the school district to repay any of the money that was stolen by Tammy Jo Saucier. You would think, with the way that they love to tax and spend, and they have a whole, they have millions of dollars in their emergency fund. This, I think, would constitute as an emergency. They did not pay back the debts. They did not pay back this $84,000. You know what they did instead? They had the school do more fundraisers to pay back the debt. The Scholastic Book Fair was owed, from what I've been told, nearly $10,000 that they didn't get paid after a couple of book fairs. Dr. Zinla Elementary was not able to have a book fair at the end of last year, beginning of this year, because they were having to take money from other fundraisers. They were having to raise money other ways, the school was, to repay the money that Tammy Jo Saucier stole. So understand this. Tammy Jo Saucier stole from the parents and the teachers and the students at Dr. Zinla Elementary. And instead of the school district stepping in and taking some of the money out of their coffers, out of their millions of dollars, and saying, we're going to repay that money back to the school so the parents aren't out, they had the parents. They milked the parents for more money. And the parents had to pay back more money that they had already paid to pay for things. So this is not the fault of the teachers at the school. I don't necessarily even know that it's the fault of anybody at the school itself. Looks like Tammy Jo Saucier was weaving a pretty detailed web of lies and deceit and cover up in her path. But I do believe there is some blame to be laid at the feet of the Clay County School District for not stepping in and repaying this money, and instead making the students and the teachers and the parents repay the money that this woman stole, allegedly, that she's accused of stealing. We know the money's gone. It is a fact that the money is not in the account it was supposed to be in, and that money was spent on things on credit cards that it was not supposed to be spent on, right? The court proceedings will prove, whether the state's able to prove its case that Tammy Jo Saucier is the one that stole these, but all signs at this point indicate that she's probably the one that took this money. And regardless of who took it, the Clay County School District should have stepped in and repaid this money instead of making parents repay the money. And I know that, the school district is monitoring social media accounts. We know that. We know that they're looking at people and they're waiting for someone to say something that's false online so they can come and sue people. So they've got time to go do things like that. They've got time to do all sorts of other stuff. They've got funds to do all sorts of other things, but they don't have funds to come and step in and take care of the parents and students and the teachers at Doctors Inlet Elementary who had money stolen from them, whether by Tammy Jo Saucier or some other whatever. Whoever did it, doesn't matter. School district should have covered it. So, future updates on that are going to come. We'll see what happens. Another interesting pivot or tidbit is that Tammy Jo Saucier is being sued by a creditor, Mariner Finance. They're a company that gives loans to people, suing her for $1,900 out of a $2,900 loan that she took out that she has not repaid. She might be eligible for a mediation program. You can read the full details here. The next trial date for Tammy Jo Saucier's cases is set on January 27th. And there's three cases. There's case where she stole money, case where she went after the sheriff's deputy, shot at them, and then another one where she stole more money on via the credit card. For some reason, those are segmented into separate cases. I'm sure there's a legal reason for that. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not well versed enough in the law to tell you why that might be. But there are three separate cases, but all of them are set to have a hearing on January 27th at 9 a.m. I will tell you that these trials are open to the public. You can go into the courthouse. You can't take pictures. You can't go in and cause a ruckus, but you can sit quietly and listen to the proceedings and see what's happening. During most people's work days, so I don't know who's going to really be able to go to it, but if you are interested in this case and you want to see, what the next update is going to be, January 27th at 9 a.m. is your shot to do that. So moving on to something a little more lighthearted, a little more fun, a little less depressing, is a story that's written by our very own Peter Swanson. The title of the story is Not Enough Salt Helped Kill the Confederacy. It also defined Florida's role in the war. This is a timely story in a couple different ways, very interesting to me. I'm a history buff, love reading about things that happened in the past and people that were here and lived in the land that you live on before and what they thought and what they did. I also love Civil War history. I think it's very interesting. The strategy, the way the nation almost fractured, the sort of silly reason that the South decided to go to war over states' rights, which is they wanted to own human beings. That's a story for another day. But Florida's role in the war is not as grandiose as some of the other states, but this is a very interesting story. So it just sort of outlines some different things that happen. Just the lead in here is armies win battles, but wars are lost by nations. The founders of the Confederacy rejoiced in soldiers they believed to be superior butt kickers, while remaining willfully blind to the South's profound inability as a nation to stay on its feet for a full 10 rounds. It's the economy, stupid. That's a political truism that we hear today. And the South's economy clearly in the war could not compete. The role that Florida played in the war was for, a couple different things. But salt played a big part of it. Beef was another, big part of the Florida economy at the time. If you're not aware, the city of Jacksonville was once called Calford. That's why we have places like the Calford Chop House and a couple different restaurants that like to sound fancy and use an old name. It was called Calford because there was a point in the St. Johns River near Jacksonville where cows could be forded across the river. It was shallow enough and tame enough that the cattle ranchers, as they were driving their cattle to where they wanted to sell them, they could get their cattle across the river. So, pretty fancy reason. An interesting thing that comes up every year the month of February around Valentine's Day. The largest battle that took place, the actual Civil War battle that took place in the state of Florida, happened in Olustee, which is just a little bit to the west of us, over towards Lake City. There's a festival and a reenactment every year over the weekend that's closest to Valentine's Day. So that's coming up next month. Highly encourage it. If you like history and you like people who are just sort of very attentive to the details, there's a Confederate army and a Union army, and they, wage a simulated reenactment of the Battle of Olustee. It's very cool if you're into history, right? Also, a very nice state park. Olustee Battlefield State Park is a pretty interesting state park if you've never been. A lot of walking trails, a lot of forests, a lot of stuff to do there. And then in Lake City itself, they have a festival with parades and all kinds of stuff, right? So something interesting to check out. And one quick tidbit about this, I highly encourage you to read this story, find out a little bit more about Florida's role in the war and how cows and salt played into that, and the origin of the word sort of Florida cracker, or term Florida cracker. Interesting tidbit, Middleburg's role in the war is that the biggest thing that happened in Middleburg during the Civil War was that the 4th Massachusetts Cavalry burned a whole bunch of the town in 1864. Almost the whole town was burned to the ground. So Clay County is rife with all sorts of history. There's all sorts of things that have happened here that are very interesting. We Clay News and Views partners with the Clay County Archive. And once a month we get a story from them by the Vishy Gehrig, who runs the archives. She compiles these very interesting tidbits of history, gives it to us, we publish it. I think she gives it to a couple other places also, Neighbor to Neighbor, a few others. But that's pretty cool, right? If you're into history, come for the political hot takes, stay for the cool history stories is my thought on that stuff, right? So interesting story there. Another interesting story that we had on the website recently is the challenge that Tyler Wright is mounting against red light cameras, specifically the cameras in Green Cove. Take a look at this story. In essence, Tyler Wright has an attorney who is representing him. His name is Luis Montiel. Luis Montiel has written a robust 5-point constitutional challenge to red light cameras in Florida. The full details are here in this story. The reason that this is important is the state does not want to challenge. The state has really backed down on previous challenges to red light cameras. Usually what happens if someone brings a robust legal challenge to a red light camera, the state backs off and says, fine, we'll get rid of the ticket. They don't want it to come to a full court hearing. They don't want an appeal to be done so an appellate court can take a look at some of these rulings and issues on a basis of constitutionality. But that may be what's going to happen here. It's going to happen right here in Clay County. Judge Ray Forbes, who was elected a few years back, good guy from all accounts, seems very fair. He presided over the trial that was had towards the beginning of December and is set to rule on it at some point in the very near future here. As of the time that this was recorded, I didn't see any update to the ruling, anything that had been put on the court docket as far as a ruling for this case. But this case will be heard on a constitutional basis, and I think it's almost a guaranteed that if Judge Forbes rules in favor of the defendant, Tyler Wright, and says, yes, your constitutional objections to the red light cameras are true and accurate, the state is going to appeal it. I believe that if he rules the other way and says, no, you don't have a leg to stand on constitutionally, I know for a fact that Tyler Wright is going to appeal it. And then we'll go to appeals court, and then we're going to have at some point a precedent for red light cameras. If the appeals court rules against the red light cameras, it could, over the very long term, prove to be the end of red light cameras for Green Cove and Orange Park. A lot of people think that's a good thing, that they would go away. I do think there are some issues with cameras in general in Clay County, but we've got a future episode coming up where we talk about red light cameras and flock safety cameras and a whole bunch of other cameras that are going on that are up and recording and doing all sorts of stuff here in the county. And really the last thing to talk about in this episode is the Clay Delegation meeting. I don't even know how to explain this. So there are state representatives who part of their jurisdictions are parts of Clay County or sometimes all of Clay County. So you had 3 politicians sitting in the Clay County Board of County Commissioners room down at the administration building. You had Judson Sapp, newly elected, finally after spending millions of dollars, found a politician that people liked less than him and was able to win. Jennifer Bradley, who, is just Rob Bradley 2.0 in terms of her policies and voting and just complete unaccountability to taxpayers and voters. And then Sam Garrison, who, same thing, right? Everyone says he's a super nice guy, and I'm sure he's a nice man. I'm sure Jennifer Bradley's a nice guy, and Judson Sapp might be also. But you have three politicians who, in my opinion, are not really looking for input from average people like you and me, right? And they have this meeting. It's called the Clay Delegation meeting. And what it is a meeting, they go around to each of the counties that their seats cover, and they allow the county government and they allow us poor folks to come and petition them for 3 minutes and tell them what we think their priorities in Tallahassee ought to be. And of course, the government officials get to go first. And I'll tell you, the first hour of this meeting was local politicians sucking up to the state politicians, and the state politicians telling the local politicians how much they loved them. Oh, we love you so much. You're doing such a great job. We appreciate you so much. Oh, we love you. I love you. I love you. I love you. Right? You just say, I love you. I love you. I love you. And then the politicians get to the things that they want. First up was Sheriff Cook. She wants a new jail. Sheriff Cook has been pushing Judson Sapp. She believes that Judson Sapp, this is words from her mouth, she believes Judson Sapp was her best bet to get someone in Tallahassee that could get her jail money. Now, why Bradley and Garrison couldn't do that for her, I don't know. But, you'll notice that Sheriff Cook made Judson the host of her podcast that she launched, coincidentally, shortly after I launched all of the podcast and media efforts that I've been doing here for the past few years. Judson was in charge of that. Judson was real chummy, with all the CCSO events, right? So Sheriff Cook's been greasing the wheels there with Judson Sapp. He's up there. She comes, and of course, the thing that she wants is a new jail. She wants money for a new jail. Sheriff Cook has, for the last 2 years at least, every time I've seen her give a set of public remarks, has talked about how low Clay County ranks in terms of taxes. I think it's 64th out of 67 counties in terms of tax rates. And she and people like Jim Renninger and David Broski and a couple of the school board members, they also have been saying this same thing, right? They're all speaking from the same brain because they're all behind the scenes somehow getting this information. Who's disseminating it, how they all have the same talking points, I don't know. I'll leave to your imagination how you think those things might happen. But either way, they've been all talking about, the taxes are so low, we need so much more money, so much more money, so much more money. They've raised taxes at least 5 out of the last 6 years, but they always need more money. How much more is enough at this point? But Sheriff Cook needs money for a new jail. So she petitions them for a new jail. She talks about the stark realities of they don't have enough people and this, that, and the other. Or they don't have enough space for the people that they are arresting. So she makes her pitch. Aaron Skipper is there. She gives a pitch about unfunded mandates from the state. I actually agree with Aaron Skipper on that. The state likes to send down mandates to local governments and say, hey, you got to pay a whole bunch of money to do X, Y, and Z. And if you don't, you're in a whole bunch of trouble with the state government. But then they don't give any funding to accomplish those things. They expect the local municipalities to just pull that money out of thin air, I guess, and fund these mandates that they send down. Chiefly, they've been for safety, school safety. A lot of unfunded mandates for school safety. But all the other politicians were there. Mayor Randy Anderson, the people from the town of Orange Park, Stephen Kelly, the chair of the Green Coast Springs City Council, all sucking up to each other asking for money. And then after all of those folks go, the regular folks get 3 minutes to speak. So, these politicians, I've said it before, I'll say it again, it is my deeply held opinion that these politicians are not interested in any way, shape, or form hearing from me or hearing from you or hearing from anybody who is not high up in the hierarchy of the Republican Party or their donor structure or other politicians, that they're all dealing with in one way or another, whether legal or otherwise sometimes. Not to say anyone in Clay County is doing that, but there are instances where politicians have behind the scenes done things they ought not, right? So these politicians are not interested in you and me. They're not interested in hearing from us. They're not interested in what our priorities are. Delegation meetings are a formality that they are required to do, either by the state or by their local parties. I forget what they said. They gave a whole explanation for it in the meeting. But if they didn't have to do it, they wouldn't. They would not hear from you. They would not hear from me. They would not talk to either one of us. They would not care one whit what we had to say. So I believe there might be video of that somewhere. If you're interested in hearing politicians talk to each other and tell each other how much they love each other, then, by all means, go check that out. And then last thing I want to tell you about before we end this episode is a new Facebook group that I am spearheading with a whole lot of effort from a bunch of other folks as well. We just got it off the ground. It's called the Clay County Pulse. It is not officially part of Clay News and Views, but Clay News and Views is happy to share in the effort to help spread more information. So what this is going to be is a place where people can actually have conversations. There are some other groups that cover Clay County supposedly, but all they do is talk about national politics. Clay County Pulse will be for local politics only. There are other groups where it's for local stuff only, but they don't want to make politicians angry. So you can't ask hard questions. You can't have hard conversations. There's other groups where they're not really friendly to differences of opinions on all sorts of issues. Well, Clay County Pulse is for that. We're going to ask the hard questions. We're going to talk about the topics, even if the politicians don't want us to. And, we're going to allow for disagreements on policy and positions and opinions. And we're going to do it respectfully, but we're going to, allow people to actually have conversations that they're not really able to have other places. Highly encourage you, if you like what we're doing with Clay News and Views, come over to the Clay County Pulse, ask to join. I'll get you approved. I'll get you in there. And then next week, we'll be back. Next week, we're going to talk about a couple things. We're going to talk about the school board and their recent initiative to move public comments and turn off cameras. We're going to talk about how that went for them. And then we're also going to talk about some updates to the County Road 220 widening project, give some perspective on what that's going to mean for traffic and some information that we've uncovered there. So with that being said, just want to say, if anyone has listened all the way to the end of this episode, you are greatly appreciated. If you have read any of our content on clayviews.com, you are greatly appreciated. We look forward to another year of covering things in Clay County that no one else will, that need to be covered. And with that being said, we'll see you next week.